Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Russell Blake. Hi Russell.
Hi, Joanna. How are you?
I'm good. It's so lovely to have you on the show. Just a little introduction, if anybody doesn't know you. Russell is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of over 40 books and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the Times, and the Chicago Tribune. He's also co-written books with Clive Cussler and is regarded as one of the most prolific and successful indie fiction authors. So, Russell, just tell us a bit
I think
more.
I should probably just leave right after that. That's,
Well,
how
I'm
do you follow that with anything impressive?
I was going to say you've probably written to more than 40 books since I wrote that sort of introduction because you are so prolific.
Well, yeah, I think I'm on number I want 46, 47. You stop counting after a certain point.
Yeah, I imagine. But just start off by telling us a bit more about you and where you are in the world because that's exciting and a bit of a potted writing background.
Okay. I live in Mexico, in Baja, Mexico, and I've lived here for 12, 13 years now. I come from a entrepreneurial business background, and I had been writing probably for on and off just to amuse myself for the last 15, 20 years, but I never really submitted anything or considered trying to go the trad route. And then I became an indie published author in June of 2011, and I've never looked back.
Definitely. Is Baja where all the whales are? Is that the right place?
Well, we like to call, well, yes. They do pass by, and I'm not just talking about the cruise ships, but they come by every year, and it's spectacular. There's probably about 3 months where it's lousy with whales.
Well, that's just amazing. It's one of those places I'd really like to go. So I think of you there. And of course, you always mentioned tequila in your bios. What part does tequila play in your life?
Well, I would say that yeah, if from around 10 o'clock in the morning to about 3 in the morning, it plays a very important role. Either I hate it or I love it, depending on what time it is. No, tequila is like the national drink of Mexico, and when in Rome.
Yeah, well, I must say, if I get to choose, I say that. I mean, I am a tequila drinker, so whenever I read that about you, I'm like, one day I'll just have to come over and have one at
Oh
your
yeah, no,
nearby
they
bar.
make about 200 different brands of tequila,
Yeah,
so you can
that's
get into a lot of trouble just tasting them.
yeah, exactly. So I'm interested then, as someone, you write 6 to 10 books a year, I think. If you could maybe talk about how your writing process works right now.
Sure. Well, I started off as a pantser, I guess, where I did nothing except sit down with an idea and then just mush forward and see what developed. But as I've been doing this more and more, I've become really a pretty copious outliner. So I don't have to really think about where the story's going or whether I've got sufficient twists or beats, because the way I outline, I'm able to sort of visually see whether I've got sufficient movement, reversals, beats, all of the good stuff for a story. So now I'm pretty much 100% outliner, and I start writing generally at around 8 to 9 in the morning and keep going with a few breaks till about 10 to 11 at night when I'm in a novel.
Wow. Okay. So just that outlining process. Do you just do that like on a Word document, or do you use Scrivener, or are there any specific tools you use for outlining?
Well, I just do it in Excel.
Okay.
I create a spreadsheet, and I have across the top generally a list of characters, so that I remember their names and who they are. And then across the left side, running down, I'll list the chapters, and I tend to put 1 to 3 sentence descriptions of the chapters, so I know what the motivation of the chapter is. I know what's going to happen in terms of the story. I know, whether I want it to end with a cliffhanger or whether there's an action beat or there's a reversal. So, and I color code them so that at a glance I can look at the entire manuscript when I'm sort of done with the outline and visually confirm that there's sufficient action, sufficient reversals, sufficient beats of each type.
Mm.
I mean, it's a little anal, but it works for me.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I mean, I'm way behind you. I think I'm on number 11. You know, I am still counting, and it's funny. Exactly as you say, you become kind of more and more into outlining. I certainly see every book I'm doing more and more outlining. So it's interesting that you're at that point. So when you were back at book 11, what were you doing that kind of outlining, or were you still pantsing
No.
back then?
Well, I was doing single chapter summaries. I would just have a Word document and I would jot down the first 10 or 15 chapters that I thought needed to happen. And then I just trusted myself to be able to do the next 15 once I got it to about chapter 14 and a half. So it was a quasi-pantsing, quasi-outlining. But I've just discovered that the more I force myself to think through the story, and especially the structure of the story in advance, the better the story winds up being, and the
Mm.
faster I can write it.
Yeah, and how long does that outline take you to create before you start the actual writing?
2 to 3 days.
Okay, in that sort of 10-hour a day slot as well, or do
No,
you
I
think?
actually slack off when I'm outlining. I maybe I sort of do it maybe 4 hours a day because the cognitive process. When you're cogitating over what's going to happen with a story, a lot of times you want to go for a walk on the beach or whatever it is you do to sort of get yourself in the zone where you get a breakthrough idea, because
Mm.
otherwise it's just going to be hopelessly formulaic. So I don't push myself in terms of the number of hours when I'm outlining. That's simply a writing thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I think that you're right. It's often when you're out walking or doing something else that you get those ideas, and then you actually start the writing. And are you still at a walking desk?
Yes, I
Yeah,
have a treadmill desk. I've had it for what, 2.5, 3 years now?
and
Almost 3 years, I guess. And it has been a lifesaver. I recommend it to everyone. I've lost, I want to say, 25 pounds since I got it. And I'm certainly a lot healthier because that's one of the things most people don't discuss. But being an author, especially if you clock the kind of hours I do, means that you're sedentary, and that kills you.
mm, yeah, and it's cool. I'm looking at. I'm still trying to get into dictation. You know, walking and dictating. Is that something that you've tried at all, or are you good on the treadmill desk?
I'm good on the treadmill desk. It took me about 2 days to get used to it, but I don't walk fast. I mean, I walk maybe 2 miles per hour. So if I'm actually walking for 3 hours a day, I'll clock 6 miles, and that's wonderful. And then I stand up most of the rest of the time. I haven't tried the dictation thing simply because of the way my brain works. I mean, I'm very visual, and it's important for me to see how the words appear on the page, how they flow.
Yeah.
And that's important when I look at the musicality of the verse and just the pauses. I can't do it speaking.
Yeah, well, that is my mindset at the moment, and I'm like, I've got to stop sitting down. I think that's the thing. I have a standing desk now, but I think the stamina. Wanted to ask you about that. I mean, the stamina in the hours you work. Do you think it's purely the fact that you walk that you cope with that, or do you have other ways of coping with working that many hours?
Well, yeah, no, it's the dope and the booze that really, see me through. Like, what are you kidding? A little bit of coffee, but mostly it's just the excitement of getting to the next chapter. I tend to be very, I set myself up so that if I'm going to clock, say, between 6 and 8,000 words a day, I think of that. I mean, that seems daunting, but if you think of it as, okay, 4 chapters, well, that's not so bad. And now you're thinking only of those four chapters. And if you're eager to get to the next chapter as a writer, you're probably going to be eager as a reader. Because there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a chapter as a reader and going, I don't really care. I just have no impetus to turn the page. So I find that if I'm not eager to turn the page, so to speak, as a writer, it's very difficult to fake that for the reader.
Yeah, well,
So my stamina is driven by a combination of desperation and greed, I guess.
we'll come back to that.
Okay.
But on genre, I mean, you write. I've read some of your Jet books, and I mean, you write action, adventure, conspiracy, thriller, mystery under Russell Blake, and you also write YA, new adult under R.E. Blake, which are all genre fiction. Do you? I mean, like you talk about being pulled through the book and getting excited to do it. Does that only happen for writers of that kind of genre fiction? Do you think? I mean, because literary writers, I think, tend to write more slowly because they're not pulled through the book.
Right. Well, sure. When I read something, literary fiction, there's not a lot happening. There's a lot of introspection. There's a lot of beautiful use of language, flow, musicality, but not really a lot of, oh my God, I need to turn the next page to get to the next 19-line sentence. I mean, it's a different experience. It's work. Reading literary fiction is work, and it requires that you as a reader do work. You need to have developed your reading appreciation and skill level to a certain point to appreciate it. So I think writing it, you're more cognizant that your reader is likely to be parsing every single syllable. Whereas in genre fiction, sure, you aspire to some sort of musicality to your prose if you're any good, I think. But the reality is it's more about the characters in the story. So it's more about keeping the plot moving. It's entertainment. Whereas literary fiction, while it can be entertaining, I find it to be more sort of high art. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, like it's the opera of reading, but in a way it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. And do you think that an indie author can be financially successful writing anything other than genre fiction?
If they can, I haven't seen it. I mean, I hate to say that, but the way that Amazon works, it's really set up to be more along the lines of the Walmart to the world. And I'm not that sure that aficionados of literary fiction go to Walmart for their choices.
Hmm.
So I think that's one thing that TradPub does well is they tend to distribute very, they've got the entire chain and the entire prizes and literary merit, etc., that they've cultivated and curated for a century. So they really are very good at directing product to the 60 or 70,000 people that really care about it.
Mm.
Whereas on Amazon, it's more of a fast food sort of approach rather than a gourmet restaurant. And there's nothing wrong with fast food. You can make a lot of money in fast food. It's just not, it's not a three-star Michelin restaurant. At least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And of course, you write some great blog posts, occasional blog posts, but very good ones when you do. And you do talk about the quality is highly subjective point of view. So, in terms of writing fast can't equal quality. So what are your thoughts on quality and the indie world and sort of authors changing their mindset around that?
Well, I think that you have to be mission specific about your writing if you're going to do this with an expectation to earn a living at it. And given the market conditions, it's sort of like the ride at the fair, where you have to be at least this tall in order to get on the ride, and then being taller than that doesn't necessarily help you any. So I think that, as genre fiction authors, you have to develop a sense for whatever genre you're working in, because the expectations vary from genre to genre. If you're writing, Navy SEAL billionaire stepbrother shifter stuff, you probably are going to have a different quality level expectation from your consumer than if your book is sitting next to James Lee Burke. So you have to understand your genre, and you have to write well enough to satisfy the reader in that genre. And that's why I say it's subjective, because, authors always get into those arguments about, oh, 50 Shades was terrible and this newly popular book is awful and blah, 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 blah. But what they fail to recognize is that it's popular because it satisfies a popular desire for whatever the product was. So, as writers, you need to understand what your genre is, and you have to understand the conventions and the norms, and you have to write at least as well as, say, the top 10% in that genre. Now, I aspire to do better than that, but that's just a personal thing. If I'm going to do something, especially something I enjoy, I'm going to try to get better every time I do it. Otherwise, why keep doing it? With 45 or 50 books out, it's not like there's a surfeit of Russell, a dearth of Russell Blake books available for consumers to buy. So I try to raise the bar with every offering.
Yeah,
But
and
is it necessary to do that? On a personal level, probably. It depends on the genre.
yeah, and it's interesting because you, I mean, I look at the action adventure conspiracy thriller niche which you're in, and I also write in to a point, and that is actually very much full of big name traditional publishing authors and mostly men.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, did you go after that genre? Or did you? I mean, I said before we started recording that I read one of your earlier books, which was more in a supernatural kind of thriller that I write in. But did you go after a subgenre that was dominated by traditional authors on purpose, or did you kind of go in at an
I
angle?
actually I actually wasn't that thoughtful about it, and I probably should have been. On reflection, what I did was I just wrote what I enjoy reading when I read fiction, because most men read nonfiction, and I know that's a generalization, but especially as they get older, they tend to, if they have a job. Um, they tend to, when they are going to read, they tend, at least all my friends, tend to read nonfiction. So when I read fiction, I'm doing it as escapism. And the escapism, for men's fiction tends to be the adventure, conspiracy, thriller type of genre. So I just wrote what I'm accustomed to, and I knew the conventions because I've read 1,000 books in
Mm.
that genre. So I didn't have to do a lot of research to to identify what makes for a good one or a bad one. What's funny though is that as I've written more books in the genre, I've become much more analytical about how I'm achieving whatever I'm trying to achieve within the book. And I notice it's impossible not to deconstruct other people's work to see exactly what they're doing structurally. So I
Mm.
find myself doing that a lot more. But I think that if you read in the genre, you do that automatically. It's by osmosis.
Yeah, definitely. And your kind of standards go up. And I read in the same genre as you, and I write in it because I love it too. So, I'm glad you said that. And of course, I grew up reading Dirk Pitt, and I met Clive Cussler this year. So
Sure.
I was so super excited that you now co-write with Cussler. So, what are the pros and cons of being alongside such a big name?
Well, I mean, the pro is obviously that you learn a lot. I mean, he's forgotten more about writing action adventure than I'll ever know. So being exposed to that level of expectation and level of inventiveness and quality. The man's, I want to say, 84, 85 years
Mm.
old now. So if you can still work up a decent plot at that age, hats off to you. I mean, seriously. So he brings 45 years of writing in the genre to the table. So that's a tremendous learning experience. It's like going to school and church at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's the positive. The negative is that readers of authors like Clive tend to only read their favorite, Clive and maybe a couple of other big names. So you don't see the kind of audience following you over to your backlist or to your own work that you would hope. So that was a kind of a shocker for me because that was the entire idea in the first place of pursuing um, working with a big name traditionally published author was, if he's got 5 million people that buy his book, I co-write it with him. That gives me exposure to 5 million people. Well, that's not how the math really works. Because when they buy a Clive Cussler book or, a Robert Ludlum book or a Tom Clancy book, they only really see that name. They don't really see yours, even if it's on the cover. It's incidental. So, I mean, that's just the reality of it. So,
Yeah.
there's pros and there's cons.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that. I've talked to 3 people now who've co-written with bigger names, and they've all said the same thing. Like, it was a surprise because there wasn't the kind of carryover that you might expect.
Right.
But as you said, I mean, you also learned a lot, and it was super interesting. So would you do it again, or are you doing it again?
That's a difficult question. I think that I would be reluctant to do it again simply because there's only so many hours in the day. And if you're not going to see the audience carry over to your own work, it really just becomes a straight, it's a paycheck. Ask yourself, do you need the paycheck?
Mm.
Or would it be more satisfying on an emotional level, creative level, and a financial level to simply generate more of your own content? So
Yeah.
that's not a question I can answer for anybody else. For me right now, where I'm at, there's only a few people I would probably be interested in co-authoring with, because I've been there, done that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But of course, on the other side, you have Jet in Kindle Worlds. And Kindle Worlds is only open to Americans at the moment, so that's something I haven't been able to do as a British author. But
Well, you should talk to me. I've got some ways around that.
yeah, I know some there are, but I'm interested in your view of the other way then, because in the Kindle Worlds view, you are the owner of that world, and people, even though people aren't co-writing with you, they're still writing in your world. So have you seen fans of Jet go through into the Jet Kindle Worlds books?
Oh, absolutely. That's who buys them.
Right, so people do cross over even if the author name is different because the character is
They
the
they
same.
do because they do because they're buying the world. They're not buying the author at that point. In other words, they like Jet, they like explosions and a female protagonist and a certain level of prose, et cetera, et cetera. And in between me releasing Jet books, they want to read other. That's what they like consuming. They like the world. So I think it really affords. The authors that work within the world an opportunity to get exposure to readers who wouldn't otherwise see them. And I originally I did a Kindle Worlds. I wrote in Steve Conkley's world. That's how I got into the whole thing. I wrote a novella for his Perseid Collapse world, and I had a blast doing it. I mean, it was fun because I didn't have to invent a backstory. I didn't have to invent characters in a world. I could use his and plug some of my own creations into it, and it practically wrote itself.
Mm.
So that part of it was enjoyable. But I think when you write with if you write with Dan Brown, if it says Dan Brown on the cover and then your name is in 3 millimeter high letters,
Yeah.
the chances are pretty good that nobody's going to go, God, I need to go buy that guy's books. I mean, that's just how it works. Would that it were different,
Yeah.
but that's just how it works.
No,
On
it's
the fan fiction, I think you're appealing to a different readership.
Oh no,
I mean,
it's
for
really
one thing,
interesting.
you're appealing to people who like a world and are willing, they're probably buying books in the $4 to $6 range. They didn't pay $22 for your hardcover.
Yeah, okay, that's going back on my list. Fantastic.
Yeah. No, you should. I would recommend doing it. I wouldn't invest, I wouldn't spend 6 months writing a novella for one, but I think it's worth doing for an author that whose world is a good fit with yours.
Fantastic. Now, you also, I mean, you wrote again in one of your wonderful blog posts, quote, your odds of being successful are lousy, better than traditional publishing, but still terrible. So what did you mean
Oh,
by that?
you're
And
going to
what,
hold that against me.
what can listeners do to improve their odds as an indie author?
Well, I mean, I think you have to go into this understanding, that the arts and creating entertainment is the arts. Content generation of any sort, whether it's music, whether it's dance, whether it's singing, your odds are beyond terrible. And that's just always been the case. I mean, 10,000 little girls go to ballet school, but all 10,000 of them are not going to be professional dancers. It's not going to happen. So, there's a culling process, and maybe two of those will wind up being paid to perform 10 years after they start practicing and learn their craft. So I think you have to view writing exactly the same way. It's an art form. You wouldn't pick up the cello and expect to be Yo-Yo Ma after your third cello lesson. You wouldn't expect to be dancing Swan Lake after your third ballet class. And you would recognize, it's like everybody's played, or most of my friends have played in a garage band when they were teenagers. Everybody enjoys playing in a garage band, but nobody kids themselves that they're going to be the next Rolling Stones. And if they do, they get disabused of that notion pretty quickly. The odds have always been terrible in the arts of making a living at it. So once you just get that through your head, it's very freeing, because now you understand that the odds are what the odds are. You don't have unreasonable expectations, but you can start looking at how to improve those odds for yourself. And the way I recommend to any new author, or even anybody putting out their 15th book that hasn't experienced the kind of success they hope for, is keep upping your game on craft, because the readers that are going to follow you from book to book are not the ones that bought it because it was on sale and are always looking. They're not coupon clippers necessarily. The people that are going to make a living for you are people who feel that they can't get what you produce from anybody else. So you have to figure out how you're going to be the exception, how you're going to be unique in terms of your voice, in terms of your story, in terms of your word choice, your craftsmanship. Then by extension, your cover. What does it convey? What level of professionalism? Can it sit next to a traditionally published author's book on Amazon and look the same, or does it look like you did it in Microsoft Paint on a 3-day drunk? There's just presenting a professional product that appears to be worth paying for is a big part of it. And then tuning your blurb so that it can stand next to a professionally generated blurb, your product description. All of those things buy you just a little bit of edge. A little edge here, a little edge there. They see the cover. Okay, that looks interesting. They read the blurb. Okay, maybe. So then they go to the look inside, and that's where the pedal hits the metal. If you don't have them within the first couple of pages, they probably aren't going to buy the book. So that's where your craft comes in. And also, if you pick a genre, or even better, a subgenre that's large enough to support you, you're probably going to do better than if the answer to, well, who would give a shit about your book, is everybody. Well, no, not everybody. Not everybody cares. So if you're writing, say, military sci-fi, you're probably going to have much higher odds of finding a readership, because it's a very specific niche. Whereas if you're just like, oh, it's a book for the ages, well, okay, but there's a lot of those. So I think that if I was starting all over again, I would advise myself, write in a series, pick a subgenre of men's fiction because that's what I enjoy reading, and publish regularly. And then when you publish, make sure that the packaging and the product looks professional.
Mm. And you write, I mean, many of your books are shorter, aren't they?
Shorter than what?
Well, as in, I mean, I know some people think that a book has to be sort of 80,000 words, but a lot of your
No,
jet.
that's what my books are. They're between 80 and 100,000 words.
Oh, okay. I thought some of the jet ones were more novellas.
No, no, no. The jet ones are all like, my minimum word count on a jet book is 79 to 82,000 words.
Wow, there we
They
go.
just read fast.
Yeah, yeah, they do. They read really fast.
And that's good. I mean, if you
Yeah.
can put 80, look, if you can do 80,000 words and it feels like it was 40, you did something right. If you put 80,000 words and at about 60,000 you're groaning, that's not a good thing.
No, you're right. They are really, really fast, and you know how to hit a return key, as the lovely Dean Wesley Smith talks about the pacing. I think that's, yeah, it's really.
Well, yeah, and I'm getting, this latest one I'm working on. Really, this is a third in the Ramses books that I'm right now. I'm at about 25,000 words on it. I spent longer outlining this book and worrying about plot and pacing than any book so far. I've got to say, it's paid off.
No, that's fantastic. And I wanted to ask you, like, when was the tipping point in terms of when you knew this is the right thing and I'm going to make this
Well,
financially, as well as anything else?
Well, it was a disaster for the first 7 months. I was just shotgunning stuff out there, learning my painful lessons. I put out 10 or 11 books in my first 7 months, all across the board in terms of genre. I mean, the first one, Fatal Exchange, was really a crime mystery, I guess, and then the second one, the Geronimo Breach, was a conspiracy action thriller. And then, I tried a bunch of different things, all very loosely in men's fiction, but realistically hopped all over the place. And I didn't start to see any traction until I started writing my first series, because those were all standalones. And unfortunately, this market doesn't reward standalones the same way that it rewards series. So once I got that through my head, because I'm stubborn and I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be contained and limited by, writing a series that's so formulaic and predictable. Once I got past that and kind of went, yeah, but your customers are sort of saying they want series. So give the monkey what it wants. Don't fight with it. So I started doing that, and then things took off. And I
Yeah.
was also timing wise, I hit with in the golden years of KDP Select. So because I had generated enough content, I was able to run a free day about every 10 days on a new book for a solid 4 months. And that happened to be the 4 months where each time you ran a free, you would expect to see 7 to 10,000 sales after. So I was able to do that for, I want to say, a dozen books, whereas the average person, had one or two. So that was a huge leg up. Got me a lot more exposure.
Yeah, so it's still, I mean, still is, writing a series and have a lot of books. It's not rocket science.
No,
It's still the
nothing in
same.
life is.
Yeah, just being
Nothing in life is.
consistent.
And, I have friends that write in the movie industry and in TV. And I have friends who have been professional musicians and made good livings at it. And they all say the same thing. They all work their asses off. They work long hours. And they all say it's not rocket science.
Yeah, and longevity, and it's amazing how many people fall away, isn't it?
Well, because they don't have expectations that match reality. I think there's a lot of magical thinking in this business. And because I come from a business background, I tend to ask myself different questions, and I tend to view the business differently. I view it as two separate and distinctly different disciplines, one of which is content generation, and that's the writing. And then the other is packaging and selling. And that's the publishing business. And they're very different. They're distinctly different skill sets. So you kind of have to sign up to being good at both. And typically, the type of personality that enjoys content creation doesn't really have the skill set nor enjoy the publishing part of it. So it's difficult. I think most of the people I've seen that have fallen by the wayside that had a fairly strong start and couldn't keep it up did so because they just couldn't get a handle on the publishing part, not the content generation.
Yeah, all those people who went kind of back to traditional publishing because they just didn't
Well,
enjoy.
tried to. They tried to. It's not like it's easy to get picked up by traditional publishing either.
No,
I
I
mean,
mean,
that's getting harder and harder. The royalties are down. The advances are have never been lower. So it's I'm very happy being an indie. Let me put it that way. Knowing everything I know, unless you're going to have a lottery win on the trad side, you're better off being an indie, in my opinion.
and you've obviously now you've talked with Clive Cussler and you've sort of hobnobbed with big name traditionally published authors. Do you see a shift in their attitudes towards indie books and indie authors, I suppose?
Well, I don't. I'm always surprised by the sort of polarized invective that you hear from the trad versus indie. Clive, it didn't have a problem. He didn't care whether I was indie or not. He cared whether or not I could write. So he evaluated the work based on the quality of the work. He wasn't really interested whose imprint was, whether it was my own or whether it was Random House. It didn't matter. And I think that there's probably two groups and one of my has become somewhat of a friend, an internet friend, is Lawrence Block. Um, I, I think the older guys who are in the business who don't have a dog in the hunt, so to speak, they don't care. It's just you're just one of them. You're another schmuck trying to, make a living, telling stories. So, and then there's this other, Amazon is the devil, you know, that group. I don't understand that group. I really don't. It's like, yeah, I understand you've got your position of privilege and you've been awarded this, the imprimatur of quality by being curated by supposed experts. But at the end of the day, it's you writing and readers reading. So I'm not sure I understand why everyone's so angry at one group or the other.
No, I agree with you. It's interesting when I go to Thriller Fest every year, and I agree with you. And I've talked to Doug Preston, and who was of one of those groups, and yet in person he's charming and nobody says anything negative at all. Everyone, in fact, wants to know about things. They just
I think a lot of that is manufactured. I really do. I
exactly,
think that a
yeah.
lot of it is manufactured because the traditional publishers have a agenda that they're trying to advance, and Amazon has an agenda it's trying to advance. So both of them will use the media however they can to get across their perspective, and the authors, meanwhile, are creating content every day and trying to find readers.
Yeah, exactly. And I also, sorry, back on your blog again. You have another good quote. If you're successful, you've bought yourself a job. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I think anybody that's done this quote unquote successfully vocationally understands that. There's no, unless you have a lottery win. And there I can think of a few people who have. Hugh Howey is my favorite example. He's a very talented writer, and he acknowledges right up front that he doesn't know exactly why Wool went mega, and he it's not like he did something particularly different. It just did. So unless you have that kind of success, you're only as good as your next book, and your readership will forget about you very quickly because there's so many other people making noise trying to get their attention. So this is a job. This is like writing for TV. You're only as good as the next episode you're writing for. If your muse doesn't show up today, and you don't generate the required 10 pages so that somebody can film the show next week, you're out of a job. So this is, it's a wonderful job, but at the end of the day, unless you're one of the, top 50 authors in the world who have film deals and who are a household name, you're working. You bought yourself. It's exactly like if you're a business person, you go out and you buy a delicatessen or a restaurant. You're buying yourself a job. You're showing up every day, making sure that the food is fresh, making sure that nobody is stealing anything. It's a job.
Mm.
And that's what content creation and publishing is. You're creating content, which is a job, and publishing is trying to sell content, and that's a job. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful job, by the way. It's my favorite job ever.
Yes, and I agree with you. I think it is wonderful, and I love both of, all parts of it as well. But it is hard work, as you say. I mean, I work harder now than I did as a business consultant. You know.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly.
Me too. This is the most hours I've ever clocked doing anything whatsoever. And I've done a lot of different things. And this is by far the hardest, but it's also the most rewarding, just on a sort of holistic level. I've done things that have made me a lot more money, but they weren't, I wasn't looking forward to waking up every day to do it again.
Yeah, and I was writing about this the other night, just to myself in my diary, going, what is the most fun thing? And it's finishing that book and going, I made this, and I just made another one. I mean, do you still get that with each of your books, with so many?
Of course. Yeah, otherwise, yeah, why write it? I mean, I went through a period where I was kind of like just dreading the act of writing because it had become like a job. And that's why I had to kind of, talk myself through that and go, well, what did you think it was? What is your expectation in this? Do you think that every day is going to be a day where you're clocking a 10? Because no other job or career do you clock a 10 every day.
Yeah.
So why are you expecting that here? There's going to be days where you have to push yourself to get through the work, and it's a job.
And many people would say, you're at the top. You've got this great success. You've been, on all the lists.
I don't think that many. I need more people to say that. Is what I need, and then buy all my books.
Well, even Lee Child says that. He's like, well, most people have never heard of Lee Child, and it's like that's all true. But what is your ambition now? I mean, do you consider yourself ambitious, and do you have a 10-year plan as such?
Well, I think it's silly to have a 10-year plan because so much changes, from year to year. I've been doing this for 4.5 years, and the marketplace is completely different. And Amazon can flip a switch tomorrow and decide that none of my books get seen, or none of an indie's books get seen, or that they really do think 35% is the right royalty instead of 70. So much can change. The only thing that I don't have ambition to become a household name, because I'm sort of at an age where I don't require that. I don't require the entire world to think that I'm a unique voice and talent. I'm not kidding myself that I am, Steinbeck. I am producing genre fiction, and I aspire to be able to make a better than average living doing so for as long as I want to do it, and as long as readers are willing to purchase my work. Anything beyond that is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
If a movie deal comes, if somebody, says we must hand you 7 figures for your next work, whatever happens, that's all great, but I have no expectation of it. I think it's very important to be, there's that old cliche that the work is its own reward, etc. But after a certain point, once you have the car you want and you live the place you want, whatever it is in your life that you need in order to feel like you are complete and have done what you want, the work really is the reward. So it's one of those cliches. It's a cliche because it's true.
Yeah, and it has to be because you can't guarantee the success.
Well, no, you're likely not to succeed. So you might as well write something you personally are proud of and like.
Yeah, exactly. Right, last question before I let you go. What do you see coming in 2016 in the indie world? Do you think it's global translation? What is your pick?
Boy, I don't know. I'm going to try to write fewer books next year, which my editor is probably listening to this. It's going to be, she's like, I did a screen save of that. So I'm going to try to only write 5 to 6 books next year. I've been selling my translation rights. I've been very fortunate that publishers in other countries have bought Jet and have bought the Ramsey series and translated them. Audio, they kind of kicked the chair out from under
Mm.
audio when they changed the royalty scheme. So I'm not that excited about audio anymore. I invested, I want to say, at least 50 grand in narrators and doing 25 or 30 books in audio. But the ROI, the return on investment on those has shifted from where you expected to get your money back in a year to where now if you can make it back in 2 years, you're lucky. And that's 2 years is a lifetime in this business.
Mm.
So that stopped being as attractive. I think it's going to be a tough time. I think it's going to get tougher, and I think that you're going to have to paddle harder to make the same money. But nobody's holding a gun to your head either. So if you don't like it, go get a day job.
Okay, well, it's been fantastic to talk to you, Russell. So where can people find you and your books online?
Well, wherever fine ebooks are sold, you can read my thoughts, such as they are, at russellblake.com. I'm on Facebook. Just search for Russell Blake. I'm on Twitter, although very, very rarely these days. And all of my books are available through Amazon, and about 85% of them are available on iTunes and Kobo and Barnes and Noble and Wide.
All the rest. Well, thanks again, Russell. That was great.
Yeah, no, it was a real pleasure.